We are
Hey, hey,
live.
how are you?
Great. How are you?
Doing great, doing great. Looking
Good.
forward to this conversation.
Me too. Thank you again for joining me. Our last episode on the Sauce Boss podcast did so well. So, by popular demand, we're having you back. So, thank you.
Excellent, thank you. I'm looking forward to this one.
Yeah, me too. I think it's such a hot topic. So, without further ado, what we want to talk about today is combating um, cyberbullying and cancel culture from a legal standpoint. So, can you kind of like dissect the difference between defamation and cyberbullying, and how can we take legal action with that?
Yeah, it's actually a really good question because there's a subtle nuance. Defamation is a has technical elements that need to be satisfied, right? Like, number one thing, there needs to be a false statement that's published about you. So it's identified about you and it's published to third parties. That's the key here, meaning it's out to the whole world. And of course, causes harm. Harassment is a little more general, and you can harass somebody without it necessarily being defamation, right? So I could text you 10 times in a day with unwanted advances, and you can say, leave me alone. I may not have said anything false and defamatory. Does
Gotcha.
that make sense?
Yes.
So, but there's certainly crossover. So I can then, instead of doing a one-on-one harassment, I can then go on Facebook, Instagram Live, TikTok, and every time you are on, I can then start DMing you and messaging you and telling people publicly how bad you are, don't do business with her, and constantly have this communication that rises to the level of harassment. So now we've conquered both defamation and harassment with that.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So I think something that I love that we did last time that was so helpful for me, and I think listeners as well, is we gave like concrete examples of this happening. So have you seen any situations that were more considered defamation or more cyberbullying, or maybe both?
Yeah, I absolutely. I can give you a circumstance recently where a client of mine was being defamed for years publicly, right? So he's being accused, whatever the accusation is, fill in the blank, the worst of the worst that you can imagine, right? Sexual allegations, all sorts of false allegations being published on Facebook, on other social media platforms. Um, but it wasn't necessarily, for this particular gal, it wasn't necessarily harassment because it wasn't directed to her, right? So this particular poster would not send one-to-one communications. There were no texts, there were no DMs, there were no Facebook inbox messages, right? There were no phone calls. It was strictly telling the world false information about this gal. And
Like on a
so,
different like account, like their own account, they're talking about this person, but they're not
exactly
actually
right.
coming at the person. Okay.
Exactly right. Exactly right. It's published to, the world at large, but not a one-on-one to this person. And they're not necessarily tagging the person in this post. They're just disseminating false information. That's a good
Gotcha.
defamation claim, but it's not necessarily to the level of harassment. And that's where people get caught up. Like, this person won't stop harassing me. Well, I can understand why it may seem technically harassing to you because it's certainly an unwanted communication, but the communication is not coming to you,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
On the flip side, I've had situations where, for example, people, a lot of marketers run Facebook groups, right? And Facebook groups are a good cash cow. If you manage them correctly, you can build, whether you're doing classes on how to, or you are marketing to people in your group, selling a program, or they are your direct market. Facebook groups are very, very useful. Well, I've had a situation where this particular moderator is directing a communication to these particular users about their product in the group, and the communication is definitely going one way, but it's also going to everybody else. So now you have this harassment and you have a defamation of this public dissemination of false statements. So that would be a good example of triggering both.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So for someone that's experiencing defamation or cyberbullying, like what would be the first course of action? Like what could they do to get started to kind of defend themselves?
Yeah, this is a really good question because most people get this wrong. There are good things to do, there are wrong things to do. And the most common thing nowadays is people just have the public war, right? They're going on and they're having a Twitter battle publicly, or a Facebook battle, or you name it, right? On TikTok, they're answering every question and every accusation, there's a response to it. You don't want to do that, believe it or not, in most cases, right? So what you want to do is, number one, you preserve all of the evidence. Like, the first thing you have to do is you have to screenshot the false information, because it might disappear, right?
Sure.
It might get deleted tomorrow. And if you are caused harm, if you lose business, how do you prove that? It's a lengthier process and it's more complicated. So you want to screenshot. You don't have to do anything fancy. There is software out there nowadays that will actually automatically insert like the time and date and location, but just screenshot it, try to capture the URL, try to capture a clear username. Don't take a picture of it, right? Some people still don't know like screenshotting is something you can do with the device, right? I've seen people take a picture of a text and I'm like, unless I guess you can't get it off of another device. Anyway, screenshot, preserve everything. Don't respond. Don't there's something that we call the Streisand effect. Have you heard that before? The Streisand effect?
That?
It's when you create an echo chamber. It's named after Barbara Streisand. But when you call attention to something, even if you have a right to, you call attention to something, it echoes on its own, and you start creating ripple effects that were unintended, right? So don't call attention to it by going crazy at this person and hammering them in response. In most cases, let your attorney do that. You don't do it yourself.
That's so hard.
And then,
you like want to just show them,
I know, and that's the hard part, is keeping quiet, is tying yourself down and saying, let me do the prudent thing. And that takes me to number 3, talk to a professional, right? The problem is, like, this stuff happens, and when it's happening, it seems like it's going on forever, right? It seems like, oh, this has been up for a day, I'm pulling my hair out, like, I need this down right now. But then what quickly happens is, one day, like a year passes, and you haven't talked to a professional because you think it goes away, or you thought you solved it, then it rears its ugly head again, right? Like, when you deal with issues about false things being posted on websites, they get indexed by Google. Sometimes it takes a while for Google search results to show those results. So it might be that a year later, you're like, oh, geez, I thought this person shut up. And here it is, when you search my name, it's the first thing on Google results page, right? After 9 months to a year, sometimes 2 years. So, yeah, and so then they come to me and say, hey, this is what happened. And I'm like, wow, this is a great case. Like, we can really help you. And then, uh-oh, boom, past the statute of limitations. Can't do anything.
Yikes. That's like what's so hard. It's like you want to take action, even when you do it. Like, receipts are everything. Like, and especially in this worldwide web, it's so, like, when something is out there, it's out there, and it's so hard to take it back.
That's right. And again, you have to be the better person. You have to resist the temptation to start just throwing stuff and saying, this is the truth. This is, again, it's case by case. In some situations, it's okay to do that. In some situations, it makes sense. But in most cases, you don't want to just start throwing spaghetti at the wall and going nuts against this person.
Totally. So I see this a lot with influencers, and I actually spoke out on a situation yesterday about a local influencer to Utah. She is part of the LDS church, and they wear like a type of, I guess you could call it, underwear that is kind of signifying promises they make. And this particular influencer actually has gotten a lot of heat, especially in the past too, about speculation of whether or not she's wearing them. And this past week, she posted a photo with her sister, and the comments started going crazy about whether or not she's wearing garments. So in something like, in a situation like that, like, does she have defense? Like, from a legal standpoint, like, what would be your advice?
This is a really good topic. So I want to break this down into 2 parts. There's the legal side of this, right? What would you do if you were a lawyer with this client? And then there's the non-legal sort of cultural cancel culture side of this, which is really interesting too, right? So let's talk about the legal part of it. In this exact fact pattern, if somebody is following a particular religion, in this case, you know, they're Mormon and they have to wear a certain garment and somebody is publicly contesting it, depends on what the accusation is and what the results are, right? If it's just a personal attack and nobody really cares, meaning it hasn't, maybe it's harmed you, it's emotionally, those are tough cases, but you might be able to prove emotional harm. I had a case where a particular person loved a particular dog, and what happened was the dog got taken away, like it was like a what do you call this, like a rescue dog. And so my client was basically providing a home to this rescue dog. There was a dispute about the engagement and the money, and so the rescue dog was placed, but then like a few days later was taken back. And the lady who had lost the dog, she went bonkers and started saying that my client is a fraud, and my client is a nonprofit organization. Well, you would think that's so bogus. Would you have hurt feelings? Like, how is that actionable? But this particular gal had a great case against my client because she was emotionally fragile and she could prove it. She could prove that I have a history of depression. I have a history of anxiety. Yeah. So the law recognizes what we call like an eggshell plaintiff, which means I have certain tendencies and weaknesses. And if you do something to attack that and put the pressure point and I'm harmed as a result, I actually can get credit for that, meaning I can use that against you.
Oh.
So yeah. So with this particular, it is crazy. So with this particular client, or hypothetical, you know, if this person is shamed and it's in front of her primary demographic of friends, right, like other Mormons and who she respects, and they start questioning her beliefs and her commitment to her religion, I could see how you would be ostracized. It's a small, tight-knit community, right, depending if it's in Salt Lake City in particular, right, where the Mormon population is dense. I could see how you would be ostracized as a result of that. And so that's something that she should investigate. So if I were her, maybe I would just respond and set the record straight. I wouldn't get into a public argument about it, but I would say, listen, I would tell her or he, whoever the person was that said that, say, listen, what you just did was wrong and you should recant. Like you should correct yourself. Like you can't be saying, everybody can make an opinion, right? Like I can say, hey, in this picture, you can't possibly be observing your religious requirements for XYZ reason. Everybody can say that. For First Amendment speech, it's protected, it's an opinion. But when you take it a step further and say, as a matter of fact, this person is not a good Mormon. Like they don't observe the principles. They do XYZ and they deserve to be outcasted. Now we're moving towards the other side of harmful speech, right?
Absolutely. So in that situation, could she come and say, hey, I have dealt with depression and anxiety, severe anxiety, like you talked about on that previous case? Could she present, first of all, could she present something like that? And second of all, what would she need to present to do so?
Yeah, really interesting question. I think she would have to show her emotional weakness, the strength of her ties to the community, how she's been ostracized. Maybe she can produce some evidence of something like, hey, I got these text messages from people in the community saying, hey, I thought you were a good Mormon. I guess not. Right now you're getting evidence of people believing it. And that's where your case actually starts to get traction and starts to get hot. So yeah, if she could prove through medical records, and that's always the hard part, right? People frequently tell me, yeah, I have depression. Well, how do you deal with depression? Oh, I go for long walks. Could be true, but you're not going to convince a judge or a jury on something like that, probably.
So you need evidence from like a doctor saying, I'm prescribed this medication, or I've been diagnosed, or I've been treated like on such and such day. Is that kind of the evidence that you need to bring forward?
Best case scenario, you would have a documented history. I went to the doctor, I've been going to the doctor for months or years. and here's my diagnosis. I was diagnosed with depression or, you know, bipolar, whatever the problem was, and this is actually now exacerbating it. I mean, that's some damning evidence. And of course, the doctor might be deposed, and you know, we would probably produce, like if I'm on the defense, I would probably produce my own expert. I would depose this gal and say, you are not really depressed, right? I mean, this didn't really increase your level of harm. You just want that for damages, right? There's all kinds of ways to poke holes in it, but that's what you would do.
Yeah, because my first instinct is that, like, how could they prove that they caused your, like, like your depression? Like, your depression is caused by so many different things, right? So, like,
yeah.
And not that I ever condone cyberbullying or obviously none of that, but like from like a legal perspective or trying to see like how you'd fight that, like I feel that that's a hard argument because it's a pre-existing condition. How would they know that you have depression? Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes perfect sense. So you would have to show that there was an increase in whatever harm or weakness that was already there. Number one, and that the increase in harm or emotional disturbance was the direct result of those actions. So it's what we call proximate cause, right? That's the technical word that lawyers use. You have to show that there was nothing, as you astutely pointed out, there was nothing intervening in between, right? There was no other domino that fell before the domino of my harmful language. And that's what lawyers fight about all the time in these cases, is proximate cause. What actually caused your additional emotional harm, right? Was it really me? Maybe we discovered that this person is having a simultaneous domestic dispute with their spouse. Aha. So now you have to extract, you know, what the cause of that harm was. And that's not easy, right? So you're pointing out a very common problem with these kinds of cases.
Yeah, that's so sticky. Like that, I obviously am always on the side of the person that's, you know, the victim of the bullying. Like that, I never condone bullying, but I think it's such a hard case to present. And in that situation too, I think about, like, could you argue the fact that with an influencer who is primarily like influencing to a certain group, so in this case the LDS members, having someone come at you saying that you're not a good enough member, is that like, couldn't that be considered a lie too? Or I mean, with it being their business, like you're truly trying to tear their business down. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So somebody made a comment. So basically you should attempt suicide in court to win your case. No, not quite.
Oh, wow.
Not quite.
Please don't.
Yeah, no, to answer your question, if we kind of sharpen the facts a little bit, right? So suppose in this hypothetical, this person is an influencer, a female influencer within the Mormon community, right? And what's her marketplace? Is it to other Mormons, or is it the public at large? Like, who is she speaking to? Who's her marketplace?
I feel like her target audience is the LDS culture. That's why I feel like it's so like damaging to her career.
Okay, so hold that thought. So these are good facts. So you have a Mormon gal who's an influencer. She makes money perhaps by coaching other Mormon gals or guys that are struggling or trying to start a business, right? But she appeals to that market. And so her credibility as a business person revolves around her faith, right?
Exactly.
Great fact pattern. So if you publish a false statement about her belief with the intent that, I mean, leave the intent out of it. If you just publish a false statement negligently, meaning you didn't know, but you said it anyway, and you hold it out as a fact, like, hey, I saw XYZ Mormon influencer at the bar, and she's lying, and she is not a practicing Mormon at all. She doesn't believe in the faith. In fact, she's just doing this for financial gain. She has no spiritual connection. Like, you see the lines we're crossing? Like, I'm purporting a fact, something that I think is actually true, not an opinion, not, hey, I don't think you're good enough at practicing your religion. That's very different. Or, hey, you know what? I think the shirt you're wearing is a little too low cut, Miss Mormon influencer. So I don't think you're practicing what the belief said. That's totally different, right? So I think under these facts, she probably would have a pretty good case to say that, you know what? You're detracting from my message. It's actually impacting my business. And if she could prove that by commentary from her audience, right? Her audience might say, hey, is this true? Or I read this, like, can you clarify? I'm a little concerned. Or a common thing that I hear, XYZ business person won't do business with me. They dropped my endorsement because somebody else said, which is not true. It happens, right?
All the time in that situation. So a lot of what I see too, I have friends that are influencers, and this has happened before, where anonymous accounts go on and they are reaching out to the sponsors, they're reaching out to followers of a certain person and trying to get them to unfollow, to break contracts. Like, in that situation, can you try to investigate who's doing that and then go after them? Is that possible?
So this is why, I love this question. This is why bringing in a professional early is so important. And this is why we've been putting out, you follow our firm, we've been putting out a lot of content geared towards influencers, because I'm seeing this issue more and more. It's really damaging to the business. And that is this. You absolutely can discover an anonymous harasser or an anonymous defamatory post or postings. You can. But you have to approach it timely, because there's hoops you have to jump through, right? I'll give you an example. Let's say somebody posted an anonymous YouTube message about you as an influencer, purporting as fact, again, not opinion speech, right? Not what we think, but I know that this person is a fake. Here's the truth, right? You see that, like, here's the true, exposed, XYZ exposed. Yeah. And they sort of have this expose that they want people to believe as fact. And it's an anonymous YouTube account. You don't know who it is. You're watching it. You have to file a lawsuit in the appropriate jurisdiction, right? And every jurisdiction is different. But if it's in Arizona, right, or California, you have to allege that, hey, I don't know who this is. I can show my case. Here's the statement. It's false. It's defamatory. It's caused me injury. File the lawsuit, and then you have to subpoena Google to produce what we call the subscriber information. And that is not always a successful rabbit hole to go through. Sometimes if you wait too long, Google can say, I'm sorry, we don't have the information in our server. Most cases, you would get something, right? If the video was up for a month or two, there's probably enough data there that Google will produce something, assuming you did your case right. And here's the secondary problem. They might produce the user credentials, which is another random email and a burner phone number, right? Because Google has what we call 2FA, which requires verification. It texts you a number. So I've had cases where, I mean, you will never believe these facts, but friends do this. Allegedly, friends will do this. Yeah, I know, they're snakes, right? We'll do this. And I'm like, oh yeah, by the way, I saw this video about you, and I can't believe somebody would say this. Did you see this? This person's like, who would do this thing? And we will discover the cell phone from the 2FA verification that they forgot to change.
Oh.
Yeah. And
all
then
you
it becomes
internet trolls, look out, we're coming for you.
I know, right? And then it becomes, oh well, somebody's copying me. Like, this is a copycat. I'm getting catfish. Like, this is not actually me. And then we have another process of discovering that, which is, if you have let's say it's zebra21@yahoo.com is the recovery email. Well, then we'll subpoena Yahoo. We'll get the IP address, and we'll get, there's other tracks that people usually can't cover well, or they don't cover. And I don't want to educate trolls, but there are enough tools, right, when you sit in that position to go and hash this out. So, but the point is, to get to your question, it was a really good one. Can you do anything about these anonymous things? And you absolutely can if you approach it in a time-sensitive way.
Gotcha. That's so crazy. Yeah, freaking internet trolls. Quit it. We can find you.
Yeah, really. It's what I'm seeing a lot of is people who are trying to build these brands early, right? And you immediately get on the radar of your competition or jealous friends. And people will do anything. I mean, it's crazy. It's really sad. But somebody that's like, oh, I know this guy or this gal, and they got boob implants. Like, she's not really that hot. She got liposuction. She got boob implants. She got her butt redone. And here she is marketing to girls to be healthy. Like, that upsets me. So I'm going to teach her a lesson. And they go on a campaign posting false things. I've seen that. And so it's just important for your marketplace, especially, I mean, influencers, anybody who's building a brand, to just know how to deal with these situations.
Absolutely. And that kind of goes into my next question is, with cancel culture being so prevalent right now, which is, in my opinion, just terrible. I don't think anyone's about it, but what could companies or company leaders or influencers do to kind of avoid being canceled, I guess? Like, are there any checkpoints that you would recommend from a legal standpoint that they can kind of check in with themselves just to make sure they're protecting themselves?
Yeah, you know, the scary part with cancel culture is it's a fire. I was going to call it a snowball, but it's like a wildfire. Like, you just need the right amount of dry debris, and it just takes off. And the biggest fire department in the country can't put it out, right? Like, that's unfortunately what happens. And so, how do you avoid, or what's your checklist like? I think the first thing is you need to have a PR team in place at all times, even if it's somebody, right? Like somebody like you. I mean, you offer the service where, hey, we'll manage your social media campaigns, right? At least now I have a point of contact. If I am now getting, like, if my company is getting blasted on social media and saying, cancel XYZ law firm, cancel RM Warner Law, they did this in my case. And let's say they're completely in the wrong. And by the way, this has happened to us before. We're defendants who are absolute nut jobs. We're like, oh, this lawyer's like this, and they start spreading these false things. And you need to have somebody to turn to. Like, for me, in my firm, we have a full-time marketing PR person. Not everybody can afford that. Not everybody is fortunate enough to do that. They need to have somebody like you who can say, look, I have access to your platform. Here's our strategy. Boom. Number one, we're going to make a public statement. Even though Raees said don't battle people and have arguments in public, we're going to put out a statement that this is a malicious attack. Because at least at that point, there's a cross-reference to say, you know what? We have a disgruntled employee, disgruntled client, competitor, whomever, who is going on a campaign. We just want you to know that we're aware of it, and we're going to stop it. Start there. Secondly, you need somebody to come in and try to get some recourse, right? It depends on how long it goes on for. Is it one post? Is it like one blog? Or is it ongoing? Again, are they reaching customers? Like, how severe is it? So you need to have a severity scale. Is it one post, which is 1 out of 10, or are they now reaching out to customers? I've had clients say, look, I own XYZ business, and these people are now discovering my vendors, and they're saying they want to, hey, you should stop doing business with this person, and they give them a false narrative, and they lose those accounts because people don't want to be associated with those things, even if it's not true, right? Businesses don't like controversy if they're just trying to sell a product. So I think that's kind of your checklist. So you need somebody who's in marketing, who's in PR. You make your statement, you get the professionals involved early enough and say, look, is this to the level where we have to do something? Try to discover who it is. I think everybody should buy, the domains of their business names, right? So other people can't buy it and start a cancel campaign using your name, right? So, samhobson.com, hopefully you own that or something similar.
On my way now.
Yeah, GoDaddy, watch out, right? So, like, you want to make sure that you take the precautionary measures, like you're proactive, just to expect these things to happen. I mean, unfortunately, that's where we are today. Nobody has 100% satisfied customers. Nobody does.
Yeah, 100%. And I think I'm always about, like, being prepared instead of trying to remedy. And I think, from a marketing perspective, I think watching the way that you word things in captions or the things that you're posting, like making sure that you're posting things that are kosher and that can't be twisted, right?
So you make a good point, which I didn't address, which is everything you say is marketing publicly. Everything you do is marketing. The conversation we're having right now is marketing. Your posts, your Instagram lives are marketing. Even if you're not intending to, engage in a transaction, it's marketing. It's the public's perception of what you're doing. If you're not dialed into your message and you don't have somebody smart say, wait, pump the brakes, rethink that. In today's era, you're making a gross mistake, right? You're making a gross mistake. What my marketing person, Rachel, will tell you is everything goes through me or my partner, Dan. Look, we at least give it a once over because you can't it's more difficult to retract than be cautious up front, right? And unfortunately, for better or for worse, like you said, things get taken out of context. You try to say something funny and, it doesn't come out the way you want it. I can give you infinite examples of fill in the blank lives matter, right? Like whatever you want to put in there, midget lives matter. I've seen that, right? And people say, oh, it's blonde lives matter. And people say, I didn't really, yeah, I've seen all kinds of stuff, right? And the argument is, hey, I was just trying to be funny. It was a play on words, but you might be appearing to be severely, disrespectful to something that's serious, right? And some people feel differently about it. Some people feel like, well, I don't want to walk on eggshells. I want to say what I want to say. That's fine. Then you just have to be prepared for the consequences of that. That's all. You can say, anybody can say whatever they want.
So true. And that's what's hard too, I feel like, with this age of social media where I hate this word, it's just like such a buzzword, but like authenticity and being 100% yourself is what everyone's wanting, which I love that, but it does kind of get you into these tricky situations where when you're just letting out all of your opinions about everything and kind of not censoring that, that's a lot of the time where you find yourself in a canceled situation.
Yeah, you have to, again, it's when you have the right professionals in place. Again, with social media, our lives have become a marketing tool. I mean, that's just the reality. You can use it for personal purposes or you can use it for commercial purposes. But you have to be cognizant of the fact that people are catching your message, and you have to direct it in a way that you intend. To the greatest extent you can, right? We can't control how everything comes out to everybody. But I've seen some pretty egregious, like I gave you one example of the X Lives Matter being an innocent thing, at least in the minds of the person that's using it, when it turns out to be a huge cancel culture result from stuff like that. So you should what we do in our firm is we sometimes soundboard it, like we bounce it off a marketing person, bounce it off a friend or family member, somebody who you trust and who understands your marketplace, and say, is this going to come out the wrong way? And if they question it, you probably don't want to say it, right?
Absolutely. I think that's great advice, is just having that sounding board, running it through a few people. If you're not sure about, how this could be translated, ask different people, ask different, backgrounds, whether, marketing or maybe someone who's in law or even just someone who has a different perspective from you. That can be really, really helpful. So I love that advice.
Yeah, going back to cancel culture for a minute, social media has done this thing with our minds. It's really mind screwed us, if I could use that word, right? It's mind screwed us in the way that everything negative, the volume is way turned up on social media. Think about it. Anything negative, anything juicy that I can punch you in the face with, the volume is cranked on that. Anything that's valuable, that may be beneficial, gets very little volume, right? It gets very little volume. Why is that? I don't know the reasoning behind it, but the truth of the matter is that's your playground. That's what you have to work with. The positives don't matter that much, unfortunately, in social media. So when you're sending your messages, right, people will latch on to anything that has that it appears negative or can be interpreted in a way that is, negative or false. And that will get amplified. So you have 10 messages that are perfect, excellent, inspirational. One message that was poorly crafted, and people latch into that, and that's what becomes, your brand. How do you deal with that, right? And that's where cancel culture can literally kill you. But what we don't talk about is like, how do you deal with the negative, not just from the legal standpoint, but like as a human being, how do you handle that, right? What kind of advice do you give to your customers? I'm just curious, how do you handle the anguish or the mental impact of somebody posting a review or saying something to you that is just stabs you in the heart? Like, what do you do?
For me, I guess what I give advice for, and I've had this happen to me many a times, and kind of like what you said at the beginning, letting it, like, not playing into it, letting it pass over, and not like picking at the negativity, because that's when I feel like it starts to fester, and it's not helpful to anyone. So whether it's a bad podcast review, or I've been in a situation where I had an old business partner and her friends get on social media and say all of these horrible things, and I could have gotten back on my story and started saying my side of the story, right? And instead of doing that, just radio silence for me. Like take the high road, and people see that like too. So for example, in this situation where I had this ex-business partner and her friends on their stories, their followers saw that. They went and saw what I was doing, and it was radio silence for me. It was a dead end. So instead of creating all these avenues for them to go down the quote unquote rabbit hole with it, you do stop it in its tracks. And if you feel like there's an untruth, or there's something that you really feel strongly like, hey, I need to set the story straight, it's that bad, I would simply say your truth. Don't throw it back at them. Like, don't give them anything that they can then in turn twist in their own narrative, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, I guess like the ultimate goal is just to stop it in its tracks. Like, don't give them any more roads to go down with it.
So actually, the last part of what you said, I think, was the most important thing, which was don't give them any more roads to go down. And what I've seen repeatedly, and look, I'm a human being, you're a human being, this impacts all of us, is you have to build a resistance to negative talk.
Yep.
It's like when you have toxic people in your family or friends, and you're like, oh God, I can't stand this person. Everything that they say is literally like an acid rain shower, like just coming down, burning holes in my skin. Again, this is the environment where you put yourself out there, and automatically you're a target. I'm a target, you're a target, all of your customers are targets, all of my clients are targets, right? For your e-commerce brand, you're a target. And so what I tell people, aside from the legal stuff, right, is don't give this person a path to you by letting it sink into your skin. As much as it, as a business owner especially, burns you that I can't believe this person is out there damaging my reputation. You know what? You know what else is sad? And this is what I tell people. Negative thoughts can literally kill you. Science is proven, right?
Yep.
Negative thoughts can literally suppress your immune system. It can literally spawn cancer growth. So get out of your chair, stretch, laugh, smile, say, hey, great, there's one person in the world or 10 people in the world who didn't have a good day, and they're taking it out on me. And you know what? The sun's still going to come up tomorrow. I'm so grateful for what I have. And that doesn't mean you ignore the repercussions. Maybe you still hire an attorney. Maybe you still have to deal with the repercussions, but you don't allow it to anchor your ship, your business, right? You don't allow it to anchor. You don't stop everything and just, go on a crazy tirade. And I think that's what people need to hear more of, right? Most people, influencers in particular, they're getting these negative messages. It's just how you deal with it. Part of your toolkit for all of us is to build that resistance, build the ability to say, I'm mad that you did this. I'm going to take recourse, but I'm not going to let you get into my head and pull me down.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. And that's actually what I was going to kind of get into as well. It's like, I've said this before, and I tell this to, I have some like podcasting clients that we manage, and when they get a negative review or a negative Google review or whatever it is, to me, I feel like you're going in the right direction because you're striking a chord. People know that you're going places, and when they're stuck in their situation and they're not growing like you are, they're so jealous. And I know that sounds like so cheesy, but it's the truth. Like,
It's
that's a
true.
fundamental thing we learn when we're younger is like when people usually retaliate against you out of nowhere, it's because they're envious and they want to be like you. So it's
Yeah.
almost like a rite of passage for me, like in a way for me. I feel like if you get that negative feedback, like you're actually on your way to great things. That's just how I see it.
So there's a saying right in our office, and that is like when people, we've gone to battle, we litigate cases, we've had some juggernaut oppositions, and when somebody says, opposing lawyer says something to you, to your face, or you actually get written about online, we're kind of like, hey, we're kind of on the map now. We're kind of on the map now because you cared enough to critique my work. It's clearly working. You don't like me because I'm effective at my job.
Exactly.
I couldn't be happier with that kind of criticism, right? Like that's so like I've had some of my cases make blogs by First Amendment experts, and I'm like, beautiful. Come at me. Whatever you got to say it, because you're paying attention to me. That means a lot to me. Thank you very much. I think we need to hear more of that. I think people need to talk about that, especially again in the micro-influencer and the influencer world, where body shaming, lifestyle shaming, like fill in the blank shaming is happening 24/7. A good example, the supermodel Halima Aden. You've heard of her. She's a Somalian supermodel. She wears her hijab, right? She's Muslim. She practices. Like because she was vocal about her religious beliefs. This goes back to kind of what you were talking about, right? It was the inverse of it. And that is she actually wants to practice her religious belief so strongly that she actually included a clause in her modeling contract that says, I do not do photo shoots without my scarf or without the attire that I choose because I want to cover my body. Like, hats off to her, right? And so she recently, and a bunch of news articles wrote about this recently, The Guardian, and all. You can go to any fashion blog, and this is probably discussed, but she basically quit fashion shows. The latest headline is, and this is somebody who is modeling with, Bella Hadid, right? Like she's on Vogue, the cover of Vogue. Like she's a hot commodity in this world. She's like, I'm not going to do this anymore because you're trying to get me to compromise my beliefs. And so what's interesting is other Muslim girls tried to put her on the cancel culture roster by saying, oh, how are you so, humble and what's the word I'm looking for? You're not really a practicing Muslim woman because you're still flaunting yourself on the cover of a magazine. And I'm still thinking to myself, like, how stupid are you, right? So I just look at it as, again, if you make it to the map of success and you're true to your beliefs, there's always going to be people who try, for whatever reason, to put you on the cancel roster.
Absolutely.
She handled it beautifully. She said, I don't care about all you guys. Like, I don't compromise my beliefs. I was a successful model. I proved myself. And I can quit if I want to. Like, that's a very powerful story.
I love that example, and it's so true. Like, no matter how great you are or how good your intentions are, people are going to come at you. And kind of the example too of with your law firm, like when you get the criticism, it's almost like, cool, that person really does care enough about what I'm doing to even criticize it. Like, I'm on their mind at least. Like, it's better than not. Like, not saying that like all press is good press. I'm not one of those people, but I do think, it goes a long way to say, like, people have to go out of their way to tear you down. Like, that means you're pretty powerful. Like, they're intimidated and they feel like instead of just being like, oh, I don't like that person, they have to vocalize, I don't like this person, because they're so intimidated and they feel like that's the only way to get them down because they're that powerful.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. They want the world to know that you're not actually as good as people make you out to be, because they don't like the fact that you're that good. Exactly. And so, you know, we're seeing this a lot with influencers where, hey, I'm getting these comments on my post where I'm trying to promote a brand and somebody's body shaming me. Or again, the example of friends or other, you know, competitors who are promoting the same energy drink. And it's like, oh, this girl is not really that fit. She doesn't really work out 6 days a week. She doesn't really do intermittent fasting. It's all surgery. I'm like, you know what? You need to check yourself. Don't worry about what she's doing. Why don't you go and try to be as successful, right? Like, why don't you go and try to do work as hard? The time you're spending and hammering this person, spend it productively to do your own marketing, right?
Oh my gosh, yes. Like the amount of time, you're spending so much time and energy trying to tear someone else down. Like, like channel that into good. And I feel like good only fosters good in the long run. And I do think too, I mean, this is kind of like an energetic, like spiritual concept, but I feel like when you're on, like I kind of mentioned before, when you're on the cusp of something really big, or you're on the cusp of like a big manifestation, you're getting spiritually tested. So it could be even, you know, getting feedback from other people, or you can even get in your own mind and you start feeling negative and you're starting to have those negative thoughts and you're like, wait, that person's doing way better than me. Like, what do I do? And I feel like those are the moments that you need to, like you said, sit back and check yourself and get back on course and channel your energy into good instead of trying to tear someone down, and channel that energy into progressing yourself instead of trying to hold someone back.
Yeah, you know, this exact point of conversation, I just heard this recently on Joe Rogan's podcast. He had Kevin Hart on his show, and they were talking about this. And it's funny, even at the highest level, you're talking about Joe Rogan has, you know, how many people who subscribe? Over 10 million subscribers to his podcast. Kevin Hart, like a household name comedian. These people still deal with the same barrage of negativity. Like, they have to deal with it the same way that you and I do, right? People who may not know me from Joe, right? They still have to deal with the same thing. In fact, they deal with it at such a scale that they've trained themselves. And it's not easy. So when you hear them talk about, hey, you know, people were asking me, like, you know, Kevin Hart, you're like this, you're like that, or Joe Rogan is a sellout, it's like this, and you start questioning yourself. And you start questioning yourself because of the success you've had, however great or however limited. You need to build a mindset where you're like, you know what, I'm not going to let this impact me. Maybe it was dumb luck. Maybe I'm not that smart or good looking or successful. Maybe it's a little stroke of luck. But you know what, I'm there. I'm going to ride this out. I'm not going to let somebody else tell me that I'm not successful in my own right. And a lot of hard work goes into that, right? Again, if you spend 15 minutes 4 times a week posting negative stuff on people's blogs, right, or websites or social media, that's 4 hours a month that you could have been promoting yourself.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes. Well, and I think too, like you're saying, like even those at the highest level are experiencing it. And I don't want this to sound grim, but like, honestly, the more you grow, the more hate you're going to get. And so when you start building that thick skin, it starts to roll off of you. Like, you start to realize how sad that person must be and how it actually isn't about you, it's about them. And so I feel like as people are growing into, you know, being an influencer or their business or whatever they're doing, and they're getting a lot of heat for it, like, you're slowly building that tolerance when you start getting those comments and you're able to get through it. Like, and then you think back, so when it happens again, you think back to when it happened to you before, and it actually wasn't the end of the world. You were able to move on from that one, so you can move on from this one. And it's just leveling up and leveling up and leveling up. So those stars that are in the spotlight, they're so used to it at this point that they're like, these people are crazy. Like, I don't even care anymore. Like, that's not going to take me down. So I think it's all about, like, building, like you said, that thick skin and just working through it.
You said it really well when you said it's spiritual. I think it is kind of spiritual because you build sort of inner layers within yourself, within your mind, within your heart. You know, you kind of go through this experience. I think a good way to describe it is it's almost spiritual. Like you go through, you get beat up. You know, lawyers have to deal with this all the time, with the ups and downs that we have in our cases and, you know, in transactions and so forth. You really have to have a layer. You really have to be a certain type of person to survive that for years, right? And I think that's something that, notwithstanding your options, your legal recourse, and the marketing that you do, you still have to build that within yourself because it can break you down. It can break you down.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. I love this note that, like, this route that we took. That was so unexpected, but it's so prevalent with cancel culture. Unfortunately, it's a thing, and I think it's a societal thing that we're all going to have to work towards ending, and it has to be a collective effort. And right now it's prevalent, but there are ways to get through it. And I think there's ways to combat it from a legal standpoint, but there are ways to get through it from a spiritual standpoint as well. And I love your perspective on that. Well, thank you again for joining. For anyone that's listening that wants to get in touch with you, you are such a perfect source for my listeners. They're business owners, they're influencers. Yes. Where can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so check us out at my initials, rmwarnerlaw.com. And we have a ton of free information, guides, and we write a lot of blogs. So certainly they can contact us through the forum. Social media, of course, that are all of our handles, RM Warner Law on Instagram. But if they send us a note through our intake, you know, we respond directly. And again, I've offered this to your demographic and your listeners. And if anybody wants to get, you know, a free resource on FTC compliance for their ads and their campaigns, they can go to our website and just in the message box put in, you know, Sauce Boss podcast, or just make reference to you. We're happy to send that to them on your behalf for free.
I love that. Thank you so much for that. And anyone listening, take advantage of that. That is free information. That is so beyond helpful. But thank you again, Raees. You're the best, and we will talk again soon.
Yes, my pleasure. And hopefully we do this before 2021 or 2020 ends and before 2021. But if we don't, have an amazing year.
Yes, you too. See you later.